Hey everyone, and welcome back to the English Anchor podcast. I'm Mia, and as always, Leo is here with me, so get cozy.
Hi everyone. Good to be back, Mia. And you said cozy. I actually made tea before we started recording today.
Did you? That's very unlike you. You're normally the person who forgets his cup on the desk until it goes cold.
That is a fair accusation. But today felt like a tea day. It's gray outside, it's quiet, and honestly I wanted something warm in my hands before we started.
I get that. Well, I have a question for you, before we begin properly.
Go on.
If somebody stopped you on the street and asked you, "What's your English level?" what would you say?
Oh, that's an uncomfortable question.
Why uncomfortable?
Because I think most people don't actually know. They have a feeling, but they don't have an answer. They say something vague like medium, or not bad, or I can understand, but I can't speak.
That last one is the most common sentence in the world of English learning.
It really is. And that's exactly what today's episode is about, because we're going to give you an actual answer.
We are. Today we're doing something a little different. This is a test.
A friendly test.
A very friendly test. Nobody is grading you, nobody is watching, and there is no certificate at the end.
But by the end of this conversation, you should be able to say your level out loud with some confidence. Not medium, an actual level.
So let's start with the basics. When we talk about English levels on this show, we're using something called the CEFR.
The Common European Framework of Reference. It's a mouthful.
It is, but the idea is simple. It divides language ability into 6 levels: A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2.
And most learners listening to us right now are somewhere in the B range, B1 or B2.
Which is a great place to be, by the way. That's the level where English stops being a school subject and starts being a tool you actually use.
That's a nice way to put it. A tool, not a subject.
So here's how our test works. I'm going to describe 6 situations, real situations, and for each one you ask yourself honestly, could I do this?
Not could I do this perfectly, could I do this at all, could I get through it?
Exactly. Because perfection is not the standard. Function is the standard.
And I'll be honest with everyone. I'll answer some of these myself as we go, so you're not doing it alone.
Good. Okay. Situation number 1.
Ready?
You're at an airport. Your flight is delayed. You need to go to the desk and ask what's happening, and then ask if you can be moved to a different flight.
Ooh, that's a good one. Because there's a small trap in it.
There is. Tell them what the trap is.
The trap is that asking what's happening is easy. That's A2. Excuse me, what's happening with the flight? Anyone can do that, but asking to be moved to another flight, that requires you to make a request politely, explain a reason, and then understand a possibly complicated answer.
And the answer at an airport desk is never simple. They say things like, "We can rebook you on the 6:40, but it's routing through a different city and your baggage is already checked."
And that sentence has 3 pieces of information in it, and the person is speaking fast, and they're stressed, and you have about 4 seconds to react.
So ask yourself, could you do that? Could you stand at that desk and get to the end of that conversation with the information you needed?
If your answer is, I could ask the question, but I'd panic at the answer, that's very typical B1.
Very typical, and that's not a bad place to be at all.
Not at all. That's the majority of learners.
And if your answer is, I could ask, I could understand, and I could also push back a bit. I could say, actually, that doesn't work for me. Is there anything earlier?
That's B2. That extra step, the pushing back.
Because pushing back requires you to build a sentence in real time, under pressure, that expresses a preference and a reason.
and it requires confidence, which honestly is half of the B2 level.
Let's do situation 2.
Hit me.
Someone at work sends you a long email. It's 3 paragraphs. It's about a project. There's a deadline in it. There's a small problem mentioned, and there's a question for you at the end.
This is the modern nightmare.
Can you read it once, understand it, and reply appropriately?
Once. That word once is doing a lot of work in that question.
It is, because a lot of learners can understand that email, but they read it 4 times.
And they open a translator for 2 of the words. And then they spend 20 minutes writing a 4-line reply.
Right. So the question isn't, can you understand it? The question is, can you understand it at a normal speed, the way a colleague would?
Honestly, this is where a lot of people discover they're lower than they thought.
Do you think so?
I do. Because reading feels safe. Reading is the skill where you have time, and time hides your weaknesses. Speaking exposes you immediately, so people assume speaking is their weak skill and reading is their strong one. But when you take the time away from reading, suddenly it's not so strong.
That's a sharp observation. Time hides your weaknesses.
It's true in every skill. Give me enough time and I'm a genius. Give me 4 seconds and I'm a beginner again.
Okay, so for this one, reading once and replying appropriately, at a normal working speed, that's solid B2.
And if you can read it once but you'd need to draft your reply carefully, maybe check it twice before sending, that's B1 going on B2.
Which is a huge number of people listening to this.
Enormous number, and I want to say something to those people directly. That's not a failure, that's a stage. Everyone passes through it.
Situation 3.
Okay.
You're watching a film, English, no subtitles. Not a documentary. A normal film, with normal people, talking normally.
Ah, the classic.
Can you follow the plot?
Notice she said follow the plot, not understand every word.
That distinction matters enormously.
It's everything, because nobody understands every word. I don't understand every word in films in my own first language sometimes. Someone mumbles, there's music over the dialogue, there's an accent I don't know.
So the real question is, can you tolerate not understanding and keep going?
That's such a good way to frame it. Tolerance for confusion.
Because that's a real skill. And it's a skill that separates B1 from B2, honestly.
Explain what you mean by that.
A B1 learner hits a word they don't know, and they stop. Mentally, they stop. They freeze on that word. They try to work it out. And while they're doing that, the film has moved on, and now they've lost 3 more sentences.
Oh, that's painful, and so accurate.
Whereas a B2 learner hits the same unknown word, shrugs internally, and keeps going, and usually the meaning comes back to them from the context 2 sentences later.
They stay in the flow.
They stay in the flow, that's the phrase.
Can I add something to that?
Please.
I think a lot of learners have been trained badly on this. In school, you're taught that not understanding a word is a mistake. It's marked in red pen. So you develop a fear of it, and that fear is what makes you freeze.
And you have to unlearn that fear.
You have to actively unlearn it. You have to practice not understanding, which sounds ridiculous, but it's real.
How would someone practice that?
Watch something slightly too hard for you and forbid yourself from pausing. Just once a week, 15 minutes. No subtitles, no pausing, no dictionary. Let it wash over you and see how much you can hold on to.
That sounds uncomfortable.
It's meant to be. That discomfort is where the growth is.
Okay, situation 4, and this one's a bit more personal.
More personal, all right.
A friend tells you something difficult, something that's genuinely upsetting them, and they're not looking for advice. They just want to be heard. Can you respond with warmth, in English, without sounding like a robot.
Oof.
Yeah,
That's a hard one. And I don't think people expect it in an English test.
which is exactly why I put it in.
Because emotional English is a real level. It's a genuine, measurable thing.
It is. Because when you're upset, or comforting someone who's upset, you can't use your prepared sentences. You can't fall back on the polite formulas you learned. I am sorry to hear that. That's grammatically perfect and emotionally empty.
And your friend can hear that it's empty.
They absolutely can. Warmth is in the small stuff. It's in, oh no, when did that happen? It's in a pause. It's in, that's really unfair, actually.
The word actually, doing enormous emotional work there.
It really is. And you can't learn that from a textbook. You learn it from listening to how real people comfort each other.
So how does someone rate themselves on this one?
I'd say, if you can only manage the formulas, that's B1. If you can improvise something that sounds like you, something that has a bit of your personality in it, that's B2, or beyond.
And there's no shame in the formulas, by the way. The formulas are a bridge. But you're supposed to walk across the bridge eventually.
Nicely said.
I have my moments.
Situation 5. This is the one people find hardest.
Now I'm nervous.
You disagree with someone, in a meeting, or with a friend, or in a group, and you have to say so, but politely, without being aggressive, and without backing down.
That is genuinely the hardest thing in English.
Is it? Say more.
Because disagreement in English is full of hidden softening. Native speakers almost never just say, "You're wrong." They say things like, "I see what you mean, but I wonder if," or, "That's a fair point, although," or, "I'm not sure I'd go that far."
And every one of those is a little cushion.
Everyone is a cushion, exactly. And if you don't have those cushions, you sound harsh. Not because you're rude, but because you're translating directly from your own language, and your language might allow more directness.
And then people think you're aggressive when you're just being efficient.
Which is so unfair, and it happens to learners constantly, especially at work.
So this one is really about diplomatic language.
And I'd argue it's the clearest signal of B2. If you can disagree gracefully in English, if you can hold your position and stay warm at the same time, you're B2. Comfortably.
Let me push you on that. Isn't that more of a personality thing than a language thing?
That's a fair challenge. And partly yes. Some people are naturally more diplomatic. But the language part is separate. You can be a very diplomatic person in your own language and still sound blunt in English, purely because you don't have the phrases.
So it's a vocabulary problem wearing a personality mask.
Ha, yes, that's exactly it.
All right, situation 6. Last one.
The final boss.
Somebody asks you an abstract question, not "what did you do yesterday?" Something like, "Do you think people are getting kinder or crueler?" Or, "Is ambition a good thing?"
Oh, the dinner party question.
Exactly. Can you hold your own for 2 or 3 minutes on something like that?
With reasons, with examples, with a bit of nuance.
Right. Because this is where a lot of confident speakers get exposed.
Absolutely they do. And I've seen it. People who are extremely fluent in daily English, shopping, traveling, small talk, all completely smooth. And then somebody asks them what they think about something abstract, and they suddenly sound like a beginner again.
Because their vocabulary is concrete. It's all nouns you can touch.
And abstract conversation needs a completely different set of words. Words about degree, about probability, about cause. It depends, to some extent, arguably, on the whole.
Those little phrases are what let you think out loud.
And thinking out loud is the top skill. That's C1 territory, if you can really do it well.
Let's be careful with that, though, because I don't want people to feel like B2 isn't enough.
No, definitely not. Let me be clear about that. B2 is a genuinely excellent level. B2 means you can live your life in English. You can work, you can make friends, you can argue, you can be funny.
You can be funny. That's an underrated marker.
Oh, that's a huge one. Humor is one of the last things to arrive. If you can make a joke in English, and it lands, and the timing is right, that's a real signal.
Timing is the hard part.
Timing is everything with humor, and timing requires you to not be thinking about grammar, because the moment you're thinking about grammar, you're too slow, and the joke's gone.
So let's add that as a bonus situation. Can you make someone laugh in English, on purpose?
On purpose. That's the key word. Accidentally making someone laugh doesn't count.
No, that one we've all done.
We've all done that one.
Okay, so let's put it together. 6 situations. Let's summarize what each level looks like.
Go for it.
If you struggled with most of the 6, you could ask the airport question but not handle the answer. You need to read the email several times. Films are hard without subtitles. You're probably somewhere around A2 to B1, and that is a completely respectable place to be.
It's the place where the real work starts, actually.
If you could manage most of them but you'd be nervous, you'd need a bit of extra time, and you'd sometimes lose the thread. That's B1. Solid B1.
And that's the biggest group of people listening. By a long way.
And if you could do almost all of them, you could disagree politely, you could comfort a friend without formulas, you could survive a film, that's B2.
And if you could do all of them, plus hold a 5-minute abstract argument with nuance, and make somebody laugh while doing it, you're heading into C1.
Which is a wonderful place, but it's not the finish line either.
There is no finish line.
There is no finish line. Even in your own first language, you're still learning words.
Every week. Genuinely.
So a few honest thoughts before we take our vocabulary from this conversation.
Yes.
First, your level is not one number. You're probably B2 at reading and B1 at speaking, or the opposite.
That's so common. And it's completely normal.
It is. So don't try to compress yourself into one letter and one number.
And second, from me, the gap between your levels is where your practice should go. If you're strong at reading and weak at speaking, more reading will not fix your speaking. That sounds obvious, but people do it constantly, because they practice the thing they're good at.
Because it feels nice.
Because it feels nice. And practice that feels nice is usually not the practice you need.
That's a hard truth.
It's a hard truth, but I stand by it.
All right, let's take some useful words from today's conversation.
Good ones today. These are all words that came up naturally while we were talking, and they're all words you can genuinely use.
First word, tolerance.
Tolerance, tolerance, tolerance.
Tolerance is the ability to accept something difficult or unpleasant without becoming upset by it.
And we used it in a very specific way today. We talked about tolerance for confusion, the ability to keep listening even when you don't understand every word.
Here's a sentence. Building a tolerance for confusion is one of the most important skills in language learning.
And notice, you build a tolerance. That's the natural verb. You build it, over time.
Good. Second word, diplomatic.
Diplomatic, diplomatic, diplomatic.
If you are diplomatic, you say difficult things in a careful, polite way that doesn't upset people.
This was the heart of situation 5, wasn't it? Disagreeing without damaging the relationship.
Exactly. Sentence. She was very diplomatic when she told her manager the deadline was unrealistic.
And a related word you'll hear, a diplomat is a person who does this professionally, in politics. But diplomatic in everyday English just means tactful.
Third word, Nuance.
Nuance, nuance, nuance.
A nuance is a very small difference in meaning, or in feeling, or in opinion.
This is a word that sounds advanced, but it's genuinely used in normal conversation.
Sentence. He explained his position with a lot of nuance. It wasn't a simple yes or no.
And the adjective is nuanced. A nuanced argument is one that sees more than one side.
That's a very useful adjective for B2 speakers. Fourth word, expose.
Expose, expose, expose.
To expose something means to reveal it, to make a hidden thing visible.
And we used it about weaknesses. Speaking exposes your weaknesses because you don't have time to hide them.
Sentence. A fast conversation exposes the gaps in your vocabulary very quickly.
Also a useful noun form, exposure. Exposure to English means the amount of English you hear and read, and more exposure is almost always good.
2 forms for the price of 1. Fifth word, improvise.
Improvise, improvise, improvise.
To improvise means to create something in the moment, without preparation.
And this is really what fluency is, when you think about it. Fluency is the ability to improvise sentences you've never said before.
That's a lovely definition, actually. Sentence. I hadn't prepared anything, so I had to improvise the whole introduction.
And the noun is improvisation. Musicians improvise, comedians improvise, and speakers improvise.
And our last word, sustainable.
Sustainable, sustainable, sustainable.
Something is sustainable if it can continue for a long time without breaking down or exhausting you.
And we didn't say this word today, but it's the word behind everything we've been discussing. A study routine that burns you out is not sustainable.
Sentence. 20 minutes a day is more sustainable than 3 hours once a month.
Which honestly is the whole philosophy of this podcast in one sentence.
It really is. 6 words. Tolerance, diplomatic, nuance, expose, improvise, sustainable.
Say them out loud today, even once, even quietly to yourself.
That's how they become yours.
So, what's your English level?
I hope you have a slightly better answer now than you did 20 minutes ago.
And whatever that answer is, it's a starting point, not a verdict.
That's beautifully put. There's a link below with a written version of these 6 situations, so you can go through them again slowly, in your own time, and think about each one properly.
And be honest with yourself when you do it. Honesty is the only way this is useful.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. It genuinely means a lot that you choose to practice with us.
It really does.
This is Mia.
And this is Leo.
You've been listening to the English Anchor podcast. Take care of your English, and take care of yourself.
Bye for now.